So when we talk about market channels, we can kind of divide them into two general categories. On the left there, we have our direct market channels, and on the right, the wholesale ones. And generally, we can differentiate. Direct markets would be where you're interacting directly with the end consumer. And these ones, within direct markets, what's really interesting is how highly variable each of these is. There's some variability on the right side as well, but within the difference between a farmer's market, a CSA, and different events, I mean, those are very different types of markets. So I don't want anyone to get the impression that a given side of this means that these things are similar. So each of these has its own kind of microanalysis to do. But generally speaking, when you are only selling one crop, so we look down this list, crop diversity. If you have a lot of different, crops, then these direct markets may be a really good choice. If you have a less amount, then sometimes focusing on the retail or the wholesale, markets can be really good. If you value or want customer interaction, then of course direct markets are going to be much higher on that threshold. Some folks really just want to grow things and not interact with their customers too much, so the wholesale might be better. Price is always the sticking point, and I think that a lot of people say, well, why would I ever think about wholesale, because the price for direct is just so much better. For shiitake, what we're generally talking about on the left side is somewhere between $12 and $16 a pound is a good place to start. On the right side, we're often talking about somewhere between $9 and $12 a pound. But, if I have 5 pounds of mushrooms, I might go to a farmer's market. I might stand there all day. I could value my time, say it's 8 hours of a day or 6 hours of a day. If I say, well, that's $10 an hour if I'm going to pay myself a low wage, and that's a lot of time spent there. And I might not even sell that 5 pounds, and versus I could spend 20 minutes dropping off those 5 pounds to a restaurant, and I might get less dollars per pound, but I may not be out any money because of the time that I invested in that transaction. Now, when you're early on in a farm, I think it is incredibly important to have some direct outlets, because relationship building, as we'll talk about a little bit, is a really critical factor in this. The only way we see small farms thriving and surviving right now is by being really good at telling their story, getting out there, and having relationship building activities in the community. So even if you're that person that kind of just wants to hide away in the woods and not deal with anyone, I think you're going to have to recognize that part of the initial thrust of the business is going to need to be in relationship building. All right. So this is from a marketing guide that I've put on the Moodle website. It's a really phenomenal guide. It's a chunk of reading. I don't necessarily think everyone needs to read all of it, but it really does give you a lot of details about these different aspects of market channel assessment. It's something that the Cooperative Extension in Tompkins County, in partnership with several other organizations, including the Small Farms Program, that we put together. So just as an example, again, one of the things to think about is, what are my first priority? What are those steady channels? And then what might be my variable ones, the ones I try to do next. So this is where we talk about a strategy where we combine different things as we go. In terms of your product line, I think it's worth starting to, if you haven't already, think about those seconds and what the possibilities are, and really start to choose an experiment, I would say, but start to think about the goal of zero crop loss, that every part of the mushroom that you harvest, whether it looks amazing or doesn't look so good, should really be filtered into some kind of product line. And again, as we've talked about before, in New York State, the status that we're in right now is that basically all these kind of secondary products are going to need to be going through a certified kitchen and a certified process in order to be sold. As we've talked about before, I think those hurdles can be overcome. I think there's a good justification for doing the food processing license and having that as part of your business. I think it's well worth it. I think it's worth starting to ask around, look at your local fire station, a local church, a restaurant that your friend might own that might rent it to you for a few hours a week, something that you could do so that you could start to think about this kind of next value-added chain, because I think it's a really important piece. And inevitably, you're going to have mushrooms that you want to dry and you want to put into that pipeline. So within this guide and some of the it gets kind of detailed in the analysis that we might be talking about with market channel assessment. But I just want to kind of highlight these these 5 factors that that I think are really interesting. And again, if you want to dig deeper, it's something to look at in the guide. And what I did is I extracted from the guide a worksheet that I'll show you next, and a nice kind of cheat sheet, what I would call it, for thinking about different market channels. So really spend some time, questioning the things you've been thinking about, and please spend some time on the forum actually sharing about the different market channels you may be thinking about or trying, and let's have some conversation about these. So I think the biggest thing that we try to stress with farmers thinking about market channel assessment is really to value your time. That I think that farmers are really adept to sacrificing time right up front. That seems to be the thing that they're willing to put out. They don't want to keep track of their time. They don't want to think about paying themselves. They're just going to, put it out there. And I think that actually, as you're developing a smart business, you have to put your time at the forefront of things. If you don't put your time up front and really value that and say that, every hour is really important, you're going to end up probably draining yourself and your resources over time. So try to put that forward as you think about these different things. We've stressed multiple times, and I'll just keep harping on it. The more I keep records, the better I understand about what's going on. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect all the time, but if you have some kind of snapshot, if you really say, for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I'm just going to keep track of my hours and really get a sense of what it's taking me to do these things, you can make such a much better suite of decisions from those records than if you just kind of emotionally think about things. And this is really true. I took a money management course years ago, and they had us for that course track our expenses personally in our lives. And it was really interesting to realize that the things I felt emotionally stressed about in terms of where I was spending money, those actually weren't the things that often had the impact on our savings or on the spending that we did every month. So by actually keeping those records, I started to actually realize what was going on, and I could make more educated decisions, not emotional decisions. The next thing on this is using, these 6 factors of performance, as they call it, but it's really looking at drilling down into it and really critiquing each channel, really thinking about it really deeply. And we'll show you the cheat sheet, which helps do that a bit. The next thing is the activity we'll have you kind of rank and compare these different channels. And then again, you kind of think about what are my primary and my secondary channels as we go. So I don't expect you to be able to read this slide, but this is the cheat sheet. I have extracted it from the full PDF for you to kind of vary, to have a look at. These aren't all the possible market channels. I think are really two really big ones that I want to focus on for folks to think about are, in addition to these, would be events. And the second one would be tourism. So let's talk about those two for just a minute. So we're familiar probably with farmers market, CSA, a roadside farm stand. I don't know if UPIC is really feasible with shiitake, but I have had some growers talk about this possibility, and I think it's a really interesting one. The idea that people could actually have an experience on a farm, it kind of goes hand in hand maybe with some tourism. But we're probably familiar with these kind of different channels on here, but I want to highlight the events and the tourism. So let's talk about events first. But I think positioning yourself at those kind of places is really important. And I think there's a difference in events that are targeted for folks coming and actually like consuming farm goods versus those that might have another function altogether. So we've tabled at events. So for instance, one year there's an event around here called Asparaganza. It's at a farm that does an asparagus. It's a cider house and a farm, and they do an asparagus event every May. Every May they do that. So one year we went and we tried to sell mushrooms. All right. And we mostly had dried at that time of the year. We had a little bit of fresh, but people were there to play games, listen to music, drink, beer, wine, eat some food from a food cart. They really weren't, we were the only vendor there that was, selling produce. And so it wasn't on people's radar. That wasn't something they were thinking to. And so it wasn't the best way to market our product. However, this past year, we went to that event and we set up an inoculation table. So basically, we allowed people to make their own mushroom log, and it was a wild success. We brought about 50 logs, and they were all gone by the end of the day. People had a ball. They had their kids doing it. They had their grandparents doing it. I mean, people just had because, people go to these events and they mill about and they kind of want to do something. And so it was a really hot attraction. And We still had our products out. We sold some, but it was not that much. But the big thing was the logs and the activity. And that was still really valuable for us. It was a great way to make connections in the community. We did sell some goods. We got some CSA signups. I mean, there's a lot of kind of secondary benefits. And we did, for our time, we made the value. We probably made $500 because we asked for a $5 to $10 donation, for those logs. And so, we made maybe $300-400 probably realistically at the end of the day. I'd have to look back at our records, but it was well worth our time, is my point. And it was much more worth it than when we went to just try to sell produce. So if the event isn't geared towards that, then it may not be worth it. We've done a number of farm tours. Our local extension does this. We do Maple Weekend, which is a really good event. That's mostly to sell maple syrup. So people are really excited about that. So events can be really useful. They can also be kind of draining and not always useful. So it kind of depends on the event. And I think what I'm thinking is some of the events are going to be better tailored towards this kind of educational focus, letting people do their own log. And that can be a great way to drive people and get some familiarity and do some things. So that's one piece. And then the tourism I want to mention, because there are a lot of spots in New York that people do come to. And what I'm really interested in with the tourism piece is the reality that you can sell your mushrooms or other products at a very high price for the volume. So when people come through in tourism events, what they often are really interested in, and there is some research to back this up, although we need quite a bit more, is people are generally more interested in spending $5 or $6 on something. And they're also interested in something that they can take home as sort of like a souvenir. And it's not so much about the opposite, which might be someone who's a local customer who's really thinking about how am I going to feed myself every week or feed my family? Like, I actually want value for the dollars I'm spending. The dollars for a tourist are less of a concern. It's more about the thing and how cool is this? Oh, this is really, I'm going to take this home and give this as a gift or something like that. So for instance, we've done really well with really small, nice packages of dried mushrooms that actually are much higher price per ounce than we would sell to, our neighbors down the road or someone at a farmer's market. But they have a nice label. They're from the Finger Lakes. They kind of have all these words and phrases, and they do quite well. We also sell our maple syrup in very small quantities. We sell them in 4 ounce. We sell them in 8 ounce, and we sometimes even sold them in 2 ounce containers because those are suitable for folks to actually take on the plane and take home, right? So think about these things. Think about the potential for tourism, and look for those hot spots, those shops. We see wineries and cideries and places that people are passing through. Even state parks can be great. Think about places you could possibly put your products that might move into that market. That's kind of a whole different thing. There is extra cost, I would say, and time with packaging up some of this stuff, but I think it's a really good potential thing to consider for a lot. Focus on sort of the 3 main ways that we've seen traditionally shiitake folks sell their mushrooms. All right. So I think there's a lot of creative edge. I think there's a lot of potential. Hopefully your wheels are turning. You're thinking about some different things, but at the end, the majority of mushrooms are sold in these 3 primary markets. So I just want to kind of zoom in on each of those a little bit. And if folks have questions or thoughts right now, feel free to throw them in the chat box and we can chat about them a little more. So farmers markets are really interesting to me. That being said, our farm personally hasn't gone to farmers markets very often, and it's mostly because we decided when we kind of stepped back and looked at our kind of overall farm goal, we decided that we didn't want to spend our Saturdays at market all day. I mean, it wasn't something that was of high interest to us. That said, I know several folks that sell mushrooms at market. They do really well. I think that farmers markets are a really great thing to do when you're just starting out. And what I'd recommend is find one of the hundreds of farmers markets that are just getting started. They're low risk. You may not sell a lot, but it's a good opportunity for you to kind of practice. What does it mean for me to, set up a table? How do I display my product? What's the logistic of handling money and labeling the product? And how am I going to display it and package it and enact a transition? How am I going to have a banner or something for my booth? There's all these kind of pieces that go in when you're realizing you have to kind of assemble things. And I think if you do it in a market that's young, usually there's no fee or very low fees. They just want farmers to actually come. You get some personal interaction. You're not as focused on oh my gosh, I have to make a ton of sales. It's actually just the experience in your own kind of learning of what it looks like. So it's kind of low stakes in that sense. So for instance, down the hill from us, there's the Ithaca Farmers Market around us here, which is huge and takes years to even get a spot into, and there's a lot of fees involved. So not the best place to start, but there's markets now in Watkins Glen, Montour Falls, Hector, all these kind of places around us where you can kind of get your feet wet. They're low risk, and you may not sell as much, but you're also not investing as much. So you can kind of try it on for size and see if it's something that's really worthwhile. Generally speaking, if you don't have a high volume of product and a diversity of products, it may not be as good of an option. It's a lot of time investment. But the example here in the picture are Steve and Julie Rockcastle. They're in Chautauqua County, New York. And they've developed a very strong market presence in Buffalo, actually, and have really built their farm enterprises around this idea that they're going to basically go up to the city on the weekends and sell their product. All right, so they just didn't feel like there was a robust enough market where they were. It's pretty rural area of Western New York, and so they decided that was worthwhile. And then they said, all right, well, that's really important for us, and we need to then expand our product line as much as possible. So they sell fresh shiitake, but they also sell dried shiitake. They sell dried shiitake powder. They were doing a frozen mushroom barley soup that they were making because they realized in the city that some folks just wanted to buy something that they could, defrost and use really easily. They do pastured beef, they do vegetables, and so they're really diversifying. They have a lot of volume because if they're going to invest in that 2-hour drive and invest in that whole setup, they need to bring a lot of volume up to market and see that really pay for them. So I think it's a really good example of when a farmer's market might make sense. I think restaurants are one of the wonderful places that I think mushrooms do really well in. I think there's a lot of opportunity and good potential. So generally restaurants want at least 5 pounds a week. Sometimes they'll take 3 pounds. Sometimes they want over 10 pounds a week. It really depends. It's really important to visit and get to know chefs or the buyers for these different restaurants. It's really important to take them a sample and take them your sales sheet, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and try to have a conversation with them. And what I've found is it's really best to consider the process of seeking out a restaurant. It's a matchmaking process. It's not just about if they're going to take you, it's if you want to take on them. So I've had several restaurants that seemed really promising, and then the chef just doesn't communicate well or kind of drops off or is very unpredictable, versus those restaurants that I can pretty much feel like I can bring whatever I have whenever I have it, and the restaurant's pretty excited to take it. So it kind of depends on really getting to know the philosophy and how the restaurant operates. And often what I do is try to find someone that works at the restaurant that isn't the main owner or chef, and ask them, say, hey, do you mind just like talking to me a little bit about the culture of the restaurant, what it's like, how the food comes in, and really getting that kind of download so you get a sense of if it's going to be a good investment of your time. I think it's important to educate as well, to say, hey, that these stems are a really valuable thing, and you can use them for soup stock, or you could powder them, or you could do something with them. Like, here's a recipe idea. So you could powder your shiitake stems and then use them to bread fish, or use them to bread chicken as an agent. Really encourage these restaurants to think about these different things as we go. So I think it's really good. I think it's a really nice thing. I would really recommend, if you're getting into production and you're starting to get there, that you focus on a restaurant, maybe one restaurant to start, and one restaurant that seems like a really good option, and kind of play with that, because it's going to allow you, if you start to think about, wow, I'm going to produce 10, 15, 20 pounds a week, maybe more, it allows you to kind of get some of those mushrooms out the door. And then you need to go to the restaurant and take pictures of what they're using your mushrooms for, and then use those in the promotion of different things. So it's an evolving relationship, and it's really, I find the most rewarding restaurants I deliver to are the ones I also like to eat at. So, again, it's not just about what will take you, but what works for your situation. All right, and then a CSA, I think, is the third way that I see most existing mushroom farms doing it. It's something we've done and really enjoyed. I think I mentioned before several times, but I'll just kind of reiterate our process. What we generally do is we're producing around 40 pounds a week on average of mushrooms, give or take. our goal is to try to get about half of those to restaurants and wholesales accounts, and the other half to our CSA. So we aim to get about 20 pounds worth of CSA members. I think we're like at 17 pounds this year or something like that. And then the rest go to these other outlets. So what we really like about the CSA is the kind of personal interaction we get to have with folks when they're picking things up. The sort of consistency of having people regularly consume mushrooms and see them over the course of the season. And really what we like is the cash flow that comes in from this, because people sign up for this in usually January, March, February, March, prior to the season when we're in a bit of a cash bind. And so that's really nice. And then, we kind of owe them those mushrooms all summer. But we're getting income from the restaurants and the other wholesale accounts. So it's a nice cash flow kind of partnership. It's really good to do this. I think it's really hard to pull this off if you don't partner with another CSA, and a vegetable one would be the most common one. We partner with a 300 member CSA, and only 10 of those members actually do the mushroom one. It's not a huge amount, but it's enough for us to make it work. And it happens to be a CSA that we also we get vegetables from as well. So what's really important for us is that we already drive to that CSA to get our vegetables, so it doesn't take a lot of time for us to do mushrooms. It should be something that's already hopefully on your route, already something that's not too far out of the way, and hopefully that's something that's available to you. But I think that the types of things we've seen, the CSA members sometimes attend our workshops. They've bought lamb from us in the fall. I mean, they become really invested in the farm, and they have a different relationship with it. And not everyone is a CSA customer. These are certain types of folks that are interested in this. So think about special events, think about special discounts, things you can offer them as perks. One of the things we offer is that we say, generally we don't really sell wild mushrooms, but if we come across some chicken of the woods or something in abundance, chanterelles, we'll give them to our CSA members. So that's something that, folks that don't know how to forage or have no experience with or no desire to, but would like to eat the mushrooms, and it's a really amazing opportunity. It's really the only way they can get those mushrooms, in their stomach. So we sell that as kind of a bonus for signing up. So one of the things I want to encourage, so some of the activities this week are around that market channel assessment and really sharing that information. Another activity is to develop your own sort of sales sheet or card. And we talked about this in the regional trainings. I'm just going to review it, but I really want folks to flesh this out and actually share these. And these are going to be nice for us as well, nice things to see and to give feedback on. So this is one actually it's kind of old at this point. We haven't needed to update it because we needed to develop those relationships early on, but we've kind of sustained those, and we haven't scaled up to a point where we need to do it again. And so I'm thinking in the next year we're going to have to do this again. But this is the one from when we started the farm, we started selling mushrooms. So the biggest thing I see across all sales sheets is on the front is a picture that really tells the story and really gets people excited. It could be a picture or multiple pictures. I've seen sales sheets from farms that have like 8 different pictures, and I think it's too much. I think it's better to have something less is more in this sense, and it really just gives the name of the farm, the location, and what you're selling. And in this case, this was specific for our log-grown shiitake. The one we'll probably update for next year is going to have to also sell our oysters and some of our other products as well. So we're going to have to figure out how to kind of tell that story a little bit different. So the front is kind of the glamour shot. The back is where you get into information. You have your contact information, you have some information about the farm, and then your prices. Now, what I wouldn't recommend is I've sort of done a bad example here, is I mixed up our direct markets with our wholesale accounts. I was trying to make one card that I could just give to anyone. But ultimately, who is this card actually for? Well, it's really that we probably needed to create a variant card for maybe potential CSA members versus wholesale accounts, and that we could pretty much template this, but not put all the information in one place, because it just tends to confuse people. So that's what I'm thinking about. For the next one is we create one for our retail markets, we create one for our wholesale markets. And the retail one is basically for the CSA, right? So this is the back of the card. What we did with this is it's like maybe a 6x8, like a large index card type size. You could do a sales sheet as a full piece of paper as well, but something that's easy. And this is what you're going to use to then take around to potential customers. And that's an activity I'm encouraging folks to do, is if you have mushrooms that you're producing right now, take a half pound, take your sales sheet, and actually start visiting some places. And if you can't get a hold of the folks, then say, I'm just going to leave the sample and my information, and I'm going to give a call in a few days, and actually just try that on for size. It's, for a lot of people, it's not a comfortable thing to do at first, but it's really worth trying it out and to say, hey, I think next year I'm really going to have a lot. I'd like to offer the sample and see what you think. It's really important as you're thinking about developing a market channel is also that you're building relationships and you're building a bit of a following. And I have to say that mushrooms really lend themselves to really to a lot of interest in people. So start taking pictures, if you're not, of mushrooms as much as possible, and put them out there in the world, because it will attract people to you. It's one of the best things. People are really enamored by them. They're interested. I can't tell you how many leads and different opportunities I've gotten just from putting photos out there all the time. So, if you haven't started to think about a social media presence, it is something that is a part of modern farming, I have to say. It's something that we're seeing farmers starting to utilize really well. I think it's really valuable. It could be intimidating, or maybe really a big turnoff at first, but I think it's a really important thing to actually do. So what we recommend is a lot of different social media channels. For farmers, I think that Instagram and I think Facebook are two that make the most sense. And the reason is because they very well visually represent themselves. And what you're really thinking about when you think about farming is storytelling. And so you're thinking about a narrative, something you're going to share with your audience over time. And there's a lot of different details to that. There's, more that we could drill into, but we're not going to get into right now with sort of strategies around social media. But what I like about Instagram is the potential for, we all have probably, well, not all of us, but a lot of us probably have a phone. It probably can take pictures. It's really easy to take a picture and upload it to Instagram really quickly. So Instagram is really built to provide sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of like really frequent updates that are kind of like on a whim. So rather than something you might do at your computer at night, which is more strategic, you're just kind of like saying, oh, look at this cool picture. I'm just going to upload this and share it, that kind of thing. So I think that's really valuable. A Facebook page is also really good for your farm. It's good to have that place to refer people back to. It's helpful to have some reviews and have some events and have the kind of the things, in a place. And it is where a lot of people are. And I think it's an important part of farming, as is a website presence. Even if it's just one page, something to be able to refer people to is really important, because whether you believe it or not, people will search for you. And if you don't have that presence, they may not be as interested in building your product. One of the things that's been really important also is, as we build relationships, is we link to them. So we talk about the other farms that have the CSAs that we are connected to, or the farm stands that we sell to. We share their information. We share information about the restaurants that we post to. When we go to a restaurant, we eat the meal, and then we take a picture of it, and then we post that and say, wow, we just enjoyed our mushrooms as part of this amazing meal at this amazing restaurant, right? These are really important things that are part of this relationship building, and a lot of that conversation is happening through social media. And I think it's